I have known Dr. Kathy Hearn for, gosh, probably 25 years. She was the head of a center in San Diego when I was just a student learning about the science of mind. And I've always just admired her and looked up to her as somebody that I would like to emulate in my own ministry. She's quite clear. She's quite wonderful. And we invited her up this past weekend to work with the board and the practitioner students and our key leaders in a process called co-creation. And it was intense. It was not always fun. It was sometimes fun. And it was one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever been a part of, and I was a participant in it. And we got very, very clear about several things that needed to be clear about. And it was the process, but it was also the masterful ability of Dr. Kathy Hearn to facilitate us through this process. And so I want to say thank you to her for that. And also, if you were part of the co-creation, would you stand up? Because I want them to know who the leaders of the center are. So if you were part of the co-creation, please stand up. This is the board, your practitioners, and your key volunteers as well. And if it was anything for them like it was for me, they're still exhausted. So anyway, thank you all very much. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Kathy Hearn, the former spiritual leader of Centers for Spiritual Living. Please welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. Let's get set up here for a second. This out over here?
Yes.
How are you?
Great.
Good. What a wonderful service. Oh, so much already. Got my notes in case I have a brain fade, you know, because we worked really hard the last couple of days. So I am completely delighted to be here with you and to meet the Calgary clan of Centers for Spiritual Living, because we are an international organization, and so it's nice to meet you. I've heard about you for a long time, and about your center. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Pat invited me to be here with you. As she said, we've known each other for a very long time, and there are many things that I love about Dr. Pat, but also her level of consciousness and the fact that she is the embodiment of joyful living and enthusiasm. And that's good modeling for me. Absolutely. As a fine and experienced minister. And I want you to know you're in good hands with the leadership of this group. Your leaders worked diligently, transparently, openly. They took risks, they communicated, and they went to a really high new place. And so there is a new consciousness coming into this organization, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it, but they did good on your behalf. And absolutely on behalf of this divine idea called the Calgary Center for Spiritual Living. Yes, let's acknowledge them. So the talk today is about closing the gap between who we say we are and how we're living. So take a breath. Breathing is always highly recommended. And I wanted to begin by, and by the way, I am enjoying your winter wonderland, and I'm leaving just as I got my snow legs, but it's good to be in a different environment. So I wanted to begin by sharing with you an ancient story. It comes out of the ancient Vedic teachings of India. And it's the story of Indra's net, I-N-D-R-A. And the story is this: that the great god Indra emerged in human consciousness about 3,000 years ago, because that's what gods do. They emerge in our consciousness. And the story of Indra is that he lives at the top of Mount Meru, which is the most sacred mountain in the Vedic tradition. And around his mountain home, his celestial home, he cast an infinite net. And I always think of the net as gold and shimmering. And in the places where the lines of the net come together, he placed one jewel for every human soul. And I actually expanded to be one jewel for everything in creation. And what that means is that you are a jewel on the net, and that you are unique and individual, and that you are placed where you are placed to discover who you are and to do what is yours to do. And in that, you help hold up your place on the net. And no one can fulfill your place on the net the way you can. And if you do not be who you are and do what is yours to do in the world, something will be missing. And that teaching of the net is so beautiful because the understanding is that each jewel reflects every other jewel. So it explains our interdependence. And it also explains that what we send around comes around. What goes around comes around. And that what we send out through the net will inevitably come back to us. So that's a little cautionary piece, right? So watch what you send through the net because you will be getting it right back. And so the understanding here is that your job and my job, our jobs, are to be utterly who we are, individually, beautifully, uniquely fashioned, and placed perfectly in life exactly where we are, to be utterly the jewel that we are. And so I would ask you, what is it that you aspire to? As you fulfill your place on the net, one way to begin to understand who you are is to see what you aspire to, who you are and what is yours to do. What do you aspire to? In other words, what is in your heart about your life? What are you called to? What are you here to do? What is it that you want to accomplish, to gain, to be, to express, to contribute? There is a poet that I like very much, David Whyte, with a Y, and he is Irish and Welsh, and he happens to live on Bainbridge Island off the coast of Washington State. And he was speaking one time for one of our conferences, and he had this beautiful expression of this. He says that whenever we long for something, and whenever we want to create something or attain something, or when we aspire to something, that we actually send our thoughts and actually a part of ourself forward across a territory. And that part of us stands there in the place of fulfillment, having already arrived. And it calls back to the rest of us at the other end of the territory and says, walk this way to your fulfillment. And I love that idea. It's that part of us already knows exactly where we want to be. And we stand there and call to the rest of us to catch up. And so I would ask you, again, what is it that you aspire to? And this talk is about minding the gap between where you are, present time, and where it is that you want to go. It's about giving some attention to the territory that needs to be crossed, step by step, day by day, to arrive, all of you, in the place of the fulfillment. And to give attention to the gap means to look at the difference between what you say is important and how you're actually living, how you're giving time, what you're giving time to. Because I'm speaking from personal experience, there can be a grand difference between what we say is important and what actually gets our time and attention. It's closing the distance between your talk and your walk. You know what I mean, yeah? That what we say is true and how we're actually walking it out in the world. It's about closing the distance between what we preach and what we practice, that's specifically for ministers, and it calls us to create a coming together of any sort of distance we have between what we know is the truth for us and what our life is about. So this phrase, minding the gap, actually came from a colleague, a ministerial colleague of mine, Reverend Wendy Craig Purcell, who's a Unity minister in San Diego. And she was with her family in London, and they were in the tube station in the underground. And all around the tube station, there are signs that say, mind the gap. And what that means is watch your step as you step from the train onto the platform, because there's a gap there, and you don't want to fall into the gap. And so she started thinking about the gaps in her life, and when she was talking about them, I started thinking about the gaps in my life, and a talk was born. And so why is it important for us to mind the gap? Well, first of all, I think of Gandhi. And Gandhi said, "My life is my message." In other words, how he was living was really what he had to share with the world. And so I would ask you to consider, is the life that you're living the message that you want to give? And I have no prejudgments about you. I have no idea what you're up to. And by the way, though, this is very personal work, so you want to watch your elbow jabbing out to the side to say to your partner, you know, I've been trying to get you to realize this for some time. So this is your own work. You know, you jab yourself and say, okay, listen to this. So Gandhi said, "My life is my message." In other words, it's how we live that broadcasts the loudest about what it is we truly believe. I don't know about you, but I was raised with a mother who had, one of her teachings was, don't do as I do, do as I say. Now, did you have my mother? Now I understand what, and she's gone beyond, you know, she's listening to me right now. I understand what she meant. She wanted something more for me. She wanted my behavior or expression in the world to be better than hers. But I will tell you that as a child, that didn't fly for me. That it really did not fly for me. That there was a disconnect. That it isn't what we say, it's what we do that broadcasts the loudest. And was it Emerson? Somebody said, "What you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying." And so the question for each one of us is, are we really giving the message that we want to give? Are we living in a way that broadcasts the greatest truth for ourselves? So that's the first thing. The second reason why I think it's so important to mind the gap is that we're here to realize our place on the net. If you like that teaching, you're here to realize your place on the net. In other words, to discover your purpose that is encoded in your very being. That you are encoded with the truth of who you are and your most natural expression in the world. And when we start feeling into that, what that purpose is, what we're here to do, we start realizing that life itself is seeking to evolve itself through us. If you think about where life is evolving, it's evolving through you and all of us who are on the planet at this time. That life itself is longing for expression through us, because that's how it works. And when you think about what it is that you aspire to, that thing that's knocking on the door of your heart, saying, realize this, follow this, do this, that it's actually life itself longing for greater expression through you. We are each the place where life becomes lived more joyously, more fully, more healthfully, more honestly, if we choose to do it that way. And when we come into that state, we evolve life here on the planet. So I would invite you to think that your highest aspiration, the things that you are called the most to, are really life seeking itself to express through you. And you are here to be more of who you really already are. It's not about being something different. It's being exactly the jewelledness of your being. The third thing is that we're called to be congruent. We're called to have a match between who we are and how we live. And we come naturally by the gaps, but that's why we're here giving attention to that. We want to fit between who we say we are and how we're living our life. And that can be true for organizations and for families, as it is for individuals. The fourth thing is that when we are living at a distance from the truth of ourself, we feel it. And no one else, we feel the disconnect, and no one else may know that about us. But we know, and we feel it. And there will be something, just a little bit of our energy where we are off from where we actually want to be. One of the most beautiful teachings of the science of mind that got me, there's so many that did, but this is one that did, that in the Science of Mind textbook it says, we are not punished for our mistakes, but by them. And the intention of talking about the gap is not about falling into guilt and shame. We say in the States, that's old school. Do you have that expression up here? That's old school. It is old school. That for us, in Science of Mind, we do not have a cosmic punisher that stands up on some high cloud and throws down thunderbolts when we have a gap. But we ourselves will experience the disconnect, that we will feel that we are not living our truest truth, and that will have effect on us. For us in Science of Mind, God, Spirit, is a coupling of infinite tenderness and exact love. Tenderness and love. And we are not punished for our mistakes, but by the inevitable consequence when we are living a disconnect. Because we don't have the fullness of our being available to what it is that we want to do. And so if you like this idea of minding the gap in your own life, what it's about is about taking personal responsibility for your own life expression. And it is about being accountable both to your life and to the truth of who you are and what you truly want and desire and to express and contribute. And it's also about being accountable to the power that you have in you. I love that we sang one power, because that is the truth. The same power that created the universe is the power that is embodied in you. You're not functioning on an infinite cosmic scale, except by the net, Indra's net, we actually are, because we're contributing to all of the energy of the universe. But you have this power to bring forth that which you desire. One of the great teachings of Ernest Holmes was there's a power for good in the universe and you can use it. In fact, I don't know if you've ever heard any recordings of his old 1950s radio programs where this big organ sound would come on, very much to the era, and this voice would boom saying there's a power for good in the universe and you can use it. And that is true. That's what we learn, that through our thoughts, through our choices, through our actions, we're creating our reality. We're creating the world in which we each inhabit. But there's also a greater truth to that, an evolving truth, which is that there's a power for good in the universe and it can use you. It is actually seeking to use you for its expression. That's what I mean about life evolving itself. And so when you're willing to look at the gap, it's just about bringing attention to the disconnects that you may have. It's about seeing what's in the way of your fullest and most joyful expression. And do you know what's in the way? A bunch of thoughts, issues, questions, unhealed material from the past, erroneous conclusions about yourself or about life or about what's possible. And it's just all a bunch of thought. And whatever thought has done, thought can undo. And that's partly why we're called the New Thought Movement. Because anytime we wish, we may have a new thought about what's possible for our lives and start harnessing that power that brings things into creation. If we look at what's in the gap, what we will see is there are a bunch of thoughts that tell us that what we want is impossible and we've started making that real. And there really is no limitation except in our own mind. And the issues that we're in are problems only because of the thoughts we have about those issues. And I assure you I have issues and lots of thoughts about them. But to close or diminish the gap means to start reckoning with those things. To start seeing what's there. Not in a negative way, not in a shameful, shame-based way, not in a guilt-ridden way, but just to look, wow, I've got a distance between where I am and actually where I want to be. And to be willing to see it and start working with those things builds in us a kind of discipline. It builds in us a spiritual rigor. And David White says that if we don't do that work, we actually set up a holy war, a holy jihad, between the self that we are, where we're standing now, and the self that's already waiting in fulfillment, saying, come this way. And if we don't work on that, we create a disintegration. And who wants that? That's not what we're about. We're about living the wholeness and the truth of our divine being. It is said that we achieve what seems to be the humanly impossible by claiming, leaning into the divinely possible. With God, with Spirit, with this infinite power of life, all things are possible. And that divine reality is already embraced and embodied within you. You can always have a new thought. You can always set the law in motion according to a new thought. You can always love more. You can always express more fully. You can always take the next step in the direction of your good. You know, and by the way, it's one step at a time. One step at a time, one day at a time. Those of you who are in recovery know that really well. One step at a time, one day at a time, keeping our eyes focused on where it is that we want to go. We have in the States a commercial, an ad on TV for Nutri-Grain bars. I had transformation by watching television for the first time in my life. And so the scenario of this ad is that there's a woman on her way to work, and instead of stopping into the bakery and eating, you know, some delicious pastry, she pulls a Nutri-Grain bar out of her pocket and she eats that. And when she gets to work, instead of taking the elevator, she takes the stairs. And at lunchtime, she passes by all of the sandwiches and she pulls out of her bag a salad and has that, you know, and on the story goes. And the line is, one good decision leads to another. I went, oh my God, it's truth on TV, because it does. If we take one step of wholeness and accountability and congruence with what we want, of just one step, then the next time we come to a step, we'll take that one more easily, and then the next one more easily, and on it goes. One good decision leads to another. And the key is about keeping your eyes on the place that you want to go. Because whatever we vision toward comes back over the track of our seeing. So the focus that you keep on the greater good that your heart is calling you to, knowing that part of you already stands there, you're actually receiving the flow of energy from that place of fulfillment. And so it is transforming you and giving you the energy to keep on and carry on. So please say this affirmation for me and with me. The only presence active in my life is love. The only presence active in my life is love. Let's say that 2 more times. The only presence active in my life is love. The only presence active in my life is love. And now, the only power active in my life is good. The only power active in my life is good. And 2 more times. 1 for mind, 1 for spirit, 1 for mind, and 1 for body. Okay, the only power active in my life is good. The only power active in my life is good. So I want to share with you a story that comes out of the New Testament. And people in the States get flinchy about Jesus sometimes. And the only problem with that is that it makes them or us miss some of the great teachings. And so I share this story with you not out of the religion of it, but out of the metaphysics of it and the message of it. And it's the story of Jesus walking on the water. And the scene is that he had just done a huge teaching by the side of the Sea of Galilee, which is actually like a big lake, a huge lake. And he had gone off